Welcome to the Climate and Coordination RCAST, where every week we'll be discussing topics related to all things climate change and RChain's role in the solution. We will be discussing technologies that can adapt and coordinate massive amounts of data like never before, forming social architectures that grow collective intelligence, sharing and evaluating data planetarily, all while maintaining personal privacy and personal data ownership. A new decentralized economy is forming as we move from the third industrial revolution, digitization, to the fourth, decarbonization. By building a co-op, built on a correct by construction, concurrent, scalable solution, RChain is structured to build out the new technology that will be required for a flourishing regenerative planet. Please join us on this journey.
Okay, good morning and welcome everyone to the newest iteration of the Climate and Coordination RCAST. We are very happy to be able to continue doing these calls. And so this week, obviously there's a lot going on in the news. There's a lot happening with climate, and I know that we're going to get into some really interesting subjects, both in the climate side and in the coordination side. So the first thing I wanted to share from this past week that I found is phys.org. This is from the college UC Davis, University of California at Davis. And this is it says 4 days ago. So this piece says natural capital, a missing piece in climate policy. And I wanted to just highlight this new term that I found, natural capital. I'm not sure if anybody else has found this term before or seen it in media, but I thought it was really fascinating. Obviously, we're, really kind of learning the hard way around the world, especially in America, that GDP is not really the best way to measure human health and success. It really kind of only touches on the stock market and some other sort of, kind of pretty far removed indicators of human health, happiness, general well-being. But this is a really interesting one, natural capital. I think it's, well past time that we create new criteria for basically measuring the nation and the world's happiness and basically well-being. And I think natural capital would be a great thing to include. So this is not just talking about the inherent sort of worth of things like forests and clean water, but also the way that these systems really aid human life. Like, if you have healthy farmland, then you're going to have great produce. And, if you have very healthy coral reefs and mangroves, other coastal wildlife systems, then you're probably going to have less erosion and less damage from tropical storms, things like that. So I just thought this was a really interesting term. Has anybody else heard the term natural capital before?
Nope, I haven't.
Mm-hmm.
Not the term, but the concept, definitely.
Oh, hi, Steve. I'm so happy you're
Hello.
here.
Nice to be here.
Yeah, so are there some other synonyms that we might use to talk about this idea of natural capital? Or anybody have any ideas on that?
If I was giving you guys something to watch or look at or read, it would be, and I've mentioned this person before, Marilyn Waring. Because she was, just to remind everybody, she was the youngest elected Conservative MP in New Zealand back in the day, sort of in the early 80s, I think. She was only 21, and she ended up being a sort of undersecretary to the Treasury. So she was doing economics, right? And she brought her own government down on the issue of nuclear weapons, docked in Wellington Harbour. So she was the vote that brought her government down and led to a change in government. And she was vilified, and she left politics and went to Yale, where she studied under J.K. Galbraith, a very famous economist. And there she did what is probably the most significant work on economics, I would say, since people like Keynes and Galbraith himself. And Galbraith actually put it forward in the book. And what she did, the book, her thesis was all about if women counted. And what she looked at was exactly what you mentioned right at the beginning about the system of national accounts that gives us GDP. And she pointed out the absurdities of this. So, for example, if a housekeeper marries her employer, GDP goes down. She may do exactly the same work as a housewife in that instance, but the GDP of the country goes down, which is absurd. When a woman goes into labour and when a woman's pregnant and then leaves the economy to give birth, GDP goes down. GDP goes up if we have a large tanker oil spill in which lots of resources need to get deployed to clear up the mess. So, oddly enough,
I remember you mentioned that one time.
Exxon Valdez is the most profitable tanker ever to have been deployed. And if you look for Marilyn Waring's, there's a YouTube movie, it's about an hour and a half. It will be gripping. Once you start listening to it, you'll just be shocked. And that gives you a view as to, in a simple way, one of the things that needs to change is we need to have another column in the UN system of national accounts, which deals with the things today that we don't count. So the labour that is often given by women in the house, right?
Right.
As well as the labour of a woman, for instance, who might walk 10 miles in Kenya to go and get water from a well. Right,
Well,
that
and
labour
also
doesn't count, but if you build a pipeline, strangely enough, the pipeline counts.
Well, and also the opposite could be true. If the woman is working and the man stays home, the man is also not paid or really supported for the work of staying home.
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing it that way round because the one of the fundamental issues that Marilyn Waring points out is that that women who are more than 50% of humanity, if you counted all the bodies that are alive, more than 50%. And their underrepresentation has led to them not being counted. And so they've been disempowered. If they had been empowered, as we all want them to be, then many of the things that we see today in terms of climate change just would never have happened. That's the assertion that she makes.
Wow.
So she's got some ideas in there, and she is at Auckland University as a professor of feminist economics, I think, both in 2 departments. And I'm pretty sure worth having a look at anything that she's doing at the moment, because it may be some concrete actions that directly relate to this natural capital idea.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you for bringing her up, and what a fantastic person to study. I can't wait to watch her videos, and I know Daryl just put.
I didn't know she'd done a TED talk. That was news.
Yeah,
I'll find that one.
I do have a second story here, and of course, Steve. If you have any stories you want to mention as well, you feel free.
Can I just add one more thing to natural capital? And that is,
of course.
If you're going to check, I want to bring it back to blockchain, you see. So if you imagine counting all the things that you should, right? So in Marilyn Waring's world, women would count, and all the things that they do would count too. And so they're enfranchised rather than disenfranchised. So in order to do that, you need a trusted mechanism to account for all of those things, all that value, not just the monetary value, but the other things that we value, like the forest we choose not to chop down. Counting all of that. So you need a kind of global ledger, because it's global, the problem. And that's precisely one of the things I think that a blockchain of like RChain is particularly suited for. What's needed is the political will to try that out and start to adopt it and roll it out. It'd be very interesting to go back to the author of the article and to send them a little note to say, have you thought about the role of blockchain in achieving natural capital across the globe? And would you be interested in having a chat about it? And invite them to this call. How's that?
Yeah, that's a great idea. That's a great idea.
Cool. I bet you could get them, Nora.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Maybe. So the next thing I wanted to just mention for my two stories for today, and I know that Daryl has some stories he wants to get into as well. This one was pretty interesting. I thought it also had some pretty high potential for blockchain integration or collaboration, whatever you want to say. This is from, I had initially wanted to talk about the role of climate change in perpetuating worsening pandemics around the world, but this looked even more interesting than that. So this is from Science Mag, October 1st, just from yesterday. This says, Europe is building a digital twin of Earth to revolutionize climate forecasts. I'll just read a little bit from this. The European Union is finalizing plans for an ambitious, quote, digital twin of planet Earth that would simulate the atmosphere, ocean, ice, and land with unrivaled precision, providing forecasts of floods, droughts, and fires from days to years in advance. Destination Earth, as the effort is called, won't stop there. It will also attempt to capture human behavior, enabling leaders to see the impacts of weather events and climate change on society and gauge the effects of different climate policies. So in here, there's some quotes from some different climate scientists around the world who talk about basically this is like the next level of being able to not only understand weather patterns and currents and different systems, but also with the human data, it'll really give us a better way to simulate different like legislative efforts and to see how they might help or not help different climate issues around the world. For example, you'll be able to like drop in a piece of legislation in a country and see, does deforestation go up or down, different things like that. Apparently this has costed an enormous amount of money. There was a previous project that was supposed to be completed but got dropped, and then this was a continuation off of that. But another thing that that they talk about that's a feature of this is something called an exascale climate model. That is an extremely complex, basically, computer. And let's see if it says here, exascale supercomputers rely on both traditional computer chips as well as graphical processing units, which are efficient at handling intensive calculations. So this really is talking about like the level of complexity that this type of model would be able to handle. And it just seems like a really interesting project that I think could help a lot of nations and help the world to understand what is going on and how to quickly fix it. Because I don't think that we have another model to really help us that's nearly as fine-tooth combed, nearly as specific, I guess we'll say, as this one. So anyway, I would love to hear what you guys think about this one.
Well, I would say that modeling is super important. I remember reading the book Storms of My Grandchildren by James Hansen, who was he worked for NASA, and he was commissioned to study the climate of Venus. And when he studied the climate of Venus, he learned a lot about CO2 and how it affects an atmosphere. And then he started applying his formulations to the Earth. And he was one of the first leading scientists to kind of expose the the challenge that we're facing with
Wow.
CO2 levels. So I think that like the whole history of climate science is kind of dependent in many ways on modeling, and so the idea of improving that is really important.
I have a sneaking suspicion that the EU is, that this is one of several developments within the EU. I think this falls under something called Horizon 2020, and beyond. I think there might be a 2030 now for Horizon as a research program, and I'm pretty sure that blockchain is in there too. What I don't know is what role it plays and whether it crosses over and into destination Earth.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that since, blockchains are so good at like recording legitimate pieces of data or verified pieces of data, that possibly like blockchain could play a role in storing different types of previous conditions, like the controls in an experiment. That would be a potential, I think, but it seems like there'd be a lot that they could do, and I'm excited to see where this goes, because like Daryl said, we only have one planet Earth, we're living on it, and things don't always go as planned. So I think the more complex, intelligent, sensitive models that we have, especially ones that take into account people and human behavior, which I think is incredibly important, I think it's going to really help.
So I found something that I was looking at whilst you were talking about it, because I Googled some stuff, and there's this report. I've pasted the PDF into the chat, and it comes from the European Commission. It's dated February 2020, and it's entitled Communication from the Commission to the European Parliament, the Council, the European Economic and Social Committee, and the Committee of the Regions, Shaping Europe's Digital Future. And in here, it lists Destination Earth. And when you scroll down to page 7, interestingly, it's worth doing a bit of investigation, I think, as a result of this. There's a set of key actions, right? And in those key actions, you will see that building and deploying cutting-edge joint digital capacities in the areas of AI, cyber, super and quantum computing, quantum communications, and blockchain. All of these feed into Digital Earth. All of these actions. You picked a good one there, Nora, because I think this is something I think that Greg's on the call. I see something that I think that the board needs to pick up on, because this might actually give us. I mean, it would be really interesting, given the reasons why RChain's founded and all the rest of it, we're all open source, to reach out to the project Destination Earth and offer RChain, say, here you go. I don't mean offer RChain the co-op, but say, look, we've got this. We'll help you set this up for a blockchain that you need. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll see if they have any contact information, if there might be a way for us to speak with them. That might be interesting. Yeah, great idea. So I know Daryl might have some topics he wanted to discuss today. Daryl, would you like to go ahead with those?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Steve, Greg said that he can't participate in the call for a little bit, so that's why you haven't heard him chime in yet. But I'm sure he's going to have lots to say about what you were just talking about. But I guess I'll just kind of move on to some other topics and see where it goes. So last week I was going to bring this one up, but didn't get a chance. And so this is an article with the headline, Governor Gavin Newsom calls for California ban on gas-fueled cars by 2035. And so what I find interesting about this is that, to me, this is a really kind of interesting case study in the idea of market and government working together. The idea is basically the market is going to have this kind of pretty much a done deal by 2035. You can argue that e-cars have been cheaper than ICE engines for a couple of years already when you calculate the life cycle costs of the vehicle. And next year, you're going to actually see actual ticket price sales being competitive with new ICE cars. So when you factor in the life cycle costs, you'll have to really want a gas car because it will cost substantially more to own one. So the economics have already shifted. Most people, when thinking about buying a new car in 2021 and 2022, who actually do some research, will want to buy electric cars because they're cheaper and they're faster and they are more high performance and all sorts of other fun bells and whistles with owning an electric car. But that said, I think that there's something important about having a government create mandates like this, and it's connected to this kind of misconception, I believe, that has kind of infected a lot of Western governments over the last 20, 30 years, and that comes from something that could be quoted from Milton Friedman, who said in the 90s, anything the government can do, the markets can do better. And that philosophy, I think, has led a lot of governments down a pathway towards a demise. And I think that there's one book that I would like to mention that really kind of lays this out well. And yet another amazing woman, Mariana Mazzucato, who wrote a book, The Entrepreneurial State, Debunking Public versus Private Sector Myths. And I'll just read from the Wikipedia about it. It argues that the United States' economic success is a result of public and state-funded investments in innovation and technology, rather than a result of the small state free market doctrine that often receives credit for the country's strong economy. Mazzucato argues that understanding the difference between the myth and the reality of this success is particularly important, saying, if the rest of the world wants to emulate the US model, they should do as the United States actually did, not as they say they did. And so I think that government can play an important role in investing in things that the free market can't. Just yesterday here in Canada, I think our Prime Minister did something that I think was smart, and he announced that we're going to be investing billions of dollars in new infrastructure as a result of COVID and climate change. That's an example where a government can invest in a future in ways that the free market can't. Governments can spend more long-term money on things like childcare and education that won't really see the effects for 10, 20 years. So it's really important, I think, as humanity moves forward, to understand the realities of how governments can be entrepreneurial. So anyway, I'm kind of too long-winded here, so I'll just wind it down by just saying I think I applaud Governor Newsom's pledge because it works with where the market is already going. It just kind of helps bring it about quicker.
Yeah, I was saying if we shift away from government versus private sector to coordination, right? And then you look at which entities have the ability to coordinate with respect to which problem areas. Then we can get off of divisive thinking and more inclusive thinking, right? I mean, I don't like to talk about free markets because there are none, right? There are always bad actors, and the markets are all, like the history of markets forever and ever and ever has shown that markets without regulation are inhuman. And that's it's just a fact of life. So there will always be regulation of markets. That's the but and so there's always going to be some role for some kind of government. But we can look at these different roles and see them from the light of who's best equipped to coordinate with respect to this problem. And then we don't have to be divisive. We can be more inclusive. And I think,
what a positive change.
And I think one of the things that was so interesting about Steve's earlier comments about Marilyn Waring is how much it related to something that I wanted to talk about, right? Essentially, we can't do good coordination without good counting, right? If you're counting in a way that is blind to a major area, whether it's what economists call externals, or in terms of if you're blind to the contributions of half the population, those kinds of accounting procedures are going to result in disasters. So first of all, it's very a good idea to make sure that we know we can always improve our counting, and that no particular counting scheme is the be all and end all, and we can't have this attitude of convenience über alles, right? Just because GDP is convenient doesn't mean it's a good idea. So that's one angle that I thought was really interesting. But the other angle is, once we start to look at these in terms of coordination problems, then we start to see solutions everywhere. And at the top of the hour, before we turned on the record button, I mentioned that I wanted to look at this in terms of healthcare. I've said this on these calls before, but I think it really bears looking at, right? If we can look at so much of what's wrong with the U.S. healthcare system in terms of very, very small coordination actions. So, as an example, if we look at just the pattern of centralizing all of the medical care into one location, right? So, and look at the consequences of that as a coordination problem. So that means that all of the population now descends to one location, right? Which puts lots of people in cars, and for the last several decades, that's been predominantly ICE cars, driving to a centralized location, right? So you have many, many, many more people on the road. And it also means that you centralize the healthcare apparatus. So if you have extremely expensive apparatus that isn't necessarily paying for itself, you are now going to be systemically tempted to deploy it in situations where it's not necessarily called for. Right? Just the coordination solution there is mismatched in terms of the kind of healthcare that you'd like to promote. Do these ideas make sense? Are folks tracking with what I'm saying?
I agree that if problems are looked at from a coordination perspective, there is usually a lot more opportunity there, I think, actionable opportunity, than if they're looked at in purely other ways. I think that's definitely true.
Right, but in the specific case, go ahead.
With healthcare, there are so many puzzle pieces to deal with. I mean, you're looking at just one, and some of these pieces are, telehealth and home care.
Yes.
There are many, many obstacles, whether they're, competitive pressures or the crazy regulatory system where each of our 50 states has different laws regarding licensure for telehealth and different privacy laws in every state. I mean, it's maybe if you paint your ideal and we go from there.
Well, what I'm really trying to do is to say, if we start thinking about these problems systemically, holistically as coordination problems, then suddenly we see the interconnections of the solutions, right? We explore the solution space differently, right? So it's a different outlook to view healthcare as a coordination problem. So the example that I was trying to give is, suppose now that we simply switch the model around, so that for in-person care, which is still a significant percentage of healthcare, for in-person care, we reimagine the caregiving in terms of deploying a much smaller population of health caregivers that go out to the population. Then what happens is suddenly you have a lot less people on the road, and at the same time you have a lot less temptation to use expensive equipment and procedures in situations where they are unwarranted. And again, these are just consequences of looking at it systemically, looking at it as a coordination problem, as opposed to, an individual physician may be very, very excited about a particular medical technology or medical technique. And in a hospital-like situation, they can lobby to have those available. And that's good for certain kinds of cases, but it's not good for all. And again, if it doesn't pay for itself, I mean, I can give plenty of examples. One of the ones that really got me thinking about this was my poor son at the age of 4 got his thumb stuck in a door, and they dispensed $2,000 worth of painkiller to my son.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's not a centralization problem. This is perverse incentive problem.
Right, but this is what I'm trying to say is that a lot of centralization gives rise to perverse incentive, and in general, the perverse incentive is a coordination problem. If we once we start looking at what we want to incentivize, the behaviors, and the outcomes, and the principles that we want to incentivize, then we can start redesigning these systems. And that's where I think blockchain really comes in, because blockchain provides tools to design incentivization schemes. So it provides a mechanism for coordination that rethinks how we incentivize things. If the only mechanism you've got is a state-run and state-managed, heavily resource-intensive capital system, then your coordination solutions are massively constrained, right? That's part of the issue. But once you have this flexible, lightweight technology that is available globally, then you can reimagine all these coordination problems, and in particular, gaming out these behaviors that you want to incentivize in a totally different way. And that's where I think there's this opportunity that people are not yet understanding. But I don't know that I'm communicating it well. So help me out, group mind.
Well, many have been looking to blockchain to help with the storage and sharing of medical records in a way that caregivers can get what they need in order to know the patient and treat the patient, and at the same time protecting privacy and personal health information. So that's one area lots of people have been looking at blockchain, but you're speaking of something even wider in scope.
That's correct. What I'm talking about is a different way of looking at problems, right? So as a computer scientist or an economist, a game theorist, all of these different sort of professional viewpoints, they try to look at things systemically, holistically, and that's one of the things that blockchain allows, is to take that kind of thinking and make it actionable, right? So how many times has an economist said, oh, if only we could create an incentivization scheme for this, right? But their tools for incentivizing are limited to capital, and capital is bound up with the state. But that doesn't have to be the case. You can have tokens. I mean, we've seen that in general, tokenization and gamification of behavior, it's widely deployed throughout society. You have loyalty points, you have air miles, all kinds of rewards programs. These sorts of things are all about the gamification of behavior. And blockchain gives lightweight tools to imagine the gamified solutions, and then deploy them and check it out in the wild. Did this work? Oh, that one didn't work. What do we need to tweak with this to make it work? Or is there some kind of a more serious adjustment that we have to do, some reimagining we have to do?
So ways of tracking and connecting the different actors involved in healthcare, whether they be individual practitioners, patients. I could see things where patients might subscribe to different services for tracking of their health telemetry from their cell phones, or from their pacemakers, or different devices that track their vitals. There's lots and lots of communication that's going on.
Yes. I mean, that's certainly the case. Obviously, a shift away from the centralized, hospital city in the middle of a city, or a hospital village in the middle of a city, is going to involve more shifts than just blockchain. But a part of that shift has to come about because people see that the centralization of those resources doesn't result in the kind of behavioral outcomes, right? And this is what I'm talking about, is this nature is very, very flexible and agile when it comes to centralization. Nature is very like the cell centralizes certain resources, but also decentralizes other kinds of behaviors and activities, so that networks of cells can readily form in order to give rise to higher function. And it's this kind of flexible balance between centralization and decentralization that we have to be able to walk. Go ahead.
But in nature, care and nurture, if it's not done by the mother or the family, generally we look at nature as being pretty brutal when it comes to health problems.
Oh, but it isn't true. Like for example, if we look at the beehive, that isn't the case. It's organized in a relatively interesting and humane way, but also look at the mycelial network, the communication network, and the root system network for trees. Trees are now proven to send resources to trees that are in stress through this network. I think a lot of the way we perceive nature is a projection, not an actuality.
Well, and also the two systems that you mentioned are highly evolved.
Sure. I mean, you know, I think a lot of these ecosystems are highly evolved, but because they're so highly evolved, you know, if we have to have a certain level of humility in looking at them. Our first glance at them may yield one perspective, and our second glance yet another perspective, and our third glance, and by the 10,000th glance, we're still neophytes. We still don't know what's going on, and it's worthwhile to hold that perspective continually, because then I think we get a chance to continue to receive wisdom from the natural world.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that just circles right back to the first thing I talked about with the natural capital, that new term I found. Yes. And I thought that was, you know, again, it goes back to this idea that we need to be able to count well, right? Yeah. Capital is a proxy for counting, you know, for our accounting or understanding or grasp of the world around us, the resources available, the energy available, etc. And if we're hold a mindset that, you know, our first count is probably wrong, and so is our second count, and so is our third count, right? This is the kind of flexibility that I think blockchain offers, right? If counting costs so much, right? If it costs the energy of the U.S. Mint and Fort Knox and all of the other infrastructure, including a standing army, then people are not so willing to re-envision the accounting. But if counting is flexible and lightweight, and we can deploy it quickly, then people are willing to explore new counting, right? And that's what I think. Anyway, I know we're coming close to the hour, so I'll get off my soapbox. No, thank you. I really appreciate your soapbox and completely agree, you know, with all of it. And well, thank you, everybody, for participating. I guess Steve had to drop off, but I was going to say thank you to Steve as well for chiming in. It's always great to hear from Steve Ross Talbot as well. So thank you, everybody, so much. If you would like to listen to more of these conversations and other conversations from RChain, you can subscribe on YouTube and follow us on Instagram. And also, if you would like to become a member of RChain, you can do so at rchain.coop. And if you're interested in being a guest in the future on these conversations, please email us at climate@rchain.coop. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Nora. Thanks, Daryl. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, everyone. Ciao, ciao.
Thanks, guys.